In today's episode, we have a very special guest joining us, Eleanor Terrett, a renowned journalist from Fox Business who has made a significant mark in the world of cryptocurrency reporting. Eleanor's journey to becoming a crypto-centric journalist at Fox Business is both inspiring and enlightening, showcasing her dedication and expertise in this rapidly evolving field. Today, we're going to be diving deep into some of the hottest topics in the crypto world. We'll be discussing the anticipation surrounding the likely approvals of Bitcoin ETFs, a development that could revolutionize the cryptocurrency market. We'll also tackle the controversial anti-crypto bill championed by Senator Elizabeth Warren, which is gaining considerable traction and sparking debates about government overreach and the need for clear guidance in the crypto space. Moreover, Eleanor will shed light on the recent criticisms Senator Warren has leveled against Coinbase's quote revolving door, as well as new reports revealing potential hypocrisy and similar conflicts in Senator Warren's own dealings. And that's not all. We're also going to speculate about what the future holds for crypto in 2024 and reflect on some of the biggest stories that have shaped the crypto world in 2023. So sit back and enjoy this insightful and engaging conversation with Eleanor Terrett, a journalist who's at the forefront of crypto reporting.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I'm here with Eleanor Terrett, journalist with Fox Business, and I want to take it from the top because you've had a pretty curious journey. I know you started, or not necessarily started, but started at Al Jazeera America and then have worked at Fox Business for the last 7+ years in multiple different roles now as a journalist covering crypto. So I want to take it from the top. How did that journey begin?
Well, to tell you the truth, I did kind of fall into it. I do say that quite a bit because I really do genuinely believe it is the truth. And for a long time, I've wanted to be a journalist, an on-air reporter talking about not necessarily crypto, but just, I wanted to be on air. That was kind of my thing. And as the years went by, I worked my way up at Fox Business. You rightly stated that. So I graduated from James Madison University. I went on to, actually, while I was there, I took it wasn't an internship. It was actually a weekend position as a production assistant at Al Jazeera America here in New York City when they were a thing. They're not a thing anymore. They closed down in 2016, but it actually was a lot of people from Fox. A lot of the production staff came over from Fox to Al Jazeera, and a lot of the talent was from NBC, CBS, various outlets. So it was very much, it was a very professional outlet. I learned a ton there. The reason I did it in the first place was because I was taking a semester off school. I wasn't exactly happy with the major I had, which was communications, broadly communications. I wanted to focus on PR. And I kind of had an internship that wasn't the greatest. I didn't love it. In hindsight, I'm really glad I didn't stick with it. But I was thinking maybe I should just give it another shot, try another place. Not all places that you intern are the same. And my dad was like, well, why don't you, you're off for a little bit. Why don't you come and do production work for Al Jazeera? My father's also in the industry as a reporter. He was with the BBC when we moved to the US in 2002, and then he went to Al Jazeera. So long story short, I went there, learned how to be a production assistant, which essentially means I was cutting the video that you see on TV. When there's a newscast, you see all the accompanying video. I was writing the little banners at the bottom. I was running scripts for all the anchors. And it was just such a cool environment. And I knew I'd found something I really loved. I was like, all right, I love TV. It's in my blood. My dad does it too. My mom was actually a traffic reporter as well. That's how her and my dad met back in the day.
That's awesome.
So I very much felt right at home. And from there, I applied to Fox because that was in my last year of college. And I thought I was applying to Fox News. And I got the call from HR and they said, you're going to be a green room assistant for Fox Business. And I'm thinking, what is Fox Business? I've never even heard of it. And my dad said, oh my goodness, you're going to be working alongside the likes of Maria Bartiromo, Stuart Varney, Neil Cavuto. And sure enough, that is exactly what I did. As a green room assistant, I was responsible for bringing all the guests to hair and makeup and then making sure they got to the studio okay. So it was a really cool foot in the door kind of role because I got to meet a lot of cool people. I met former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, on my first day, which was pretty awesome. I got to hold the Super Bowl trophy when Bob Kraft came in to talk about his Super Bowl win.
That's
so
awesome.
It was a great starting spot. And then I kind of followed up through production. Fox Business put me down at the New York Stock Exchange as a producer in 2018, and I was there until COVID. So I really got my love of markets and really financial news and journalism writing about it, sort of being immersed in it when I was down there. And then that's kind of when the crypto interest started to take off. I'd say around like 2017, 2018 was obviously the ICO boom. People were just starting to talk about crypto. And then when I started working for Charlie, that was 2021, we got a Twitter DM actually from John Deaton, not DM, but a message from John Deaton, who I was just interviewing on Twitter just now. He said, you guys want an interesting story? Look at the Ripple case. It's a lawsuit brought by the SEC, and there are some pretty interesting circumstances surrounding it. You might want to check it out. And so we did. And that's really where the coverage of crypto started, with the Ripple lawsuit, because we started with the piece that we wrote on it, and then we sort of followed through with it. And not a lot of other media outlets were following it at the time, especially not the big ones. We were definitely the only mainstream media outlet to be giving it any coverage. So kind of found my niche and kind of found a beat that I really liked. And it's not every day that a journalist gets the opportunity to pursue a new beat, because usually you're competing with other people in the same company for that particular beat, right? But this was fresh. This wasn't really being covered. So I sort of saw my opportunity and took it. And it's been 2 years now. And I'm sure you would agree, I couldn't have picked a more newsy industry with everything that's been going on. So it's worked out very well. And I've enjoyed it immensely, but it's a lot of hard work. I do feel very proud of where I've come, in 2 years, where I've been able to build up my sources. I have some great sources that I trust dearly, and those vary from people in companies to lawmakers to staffers on the Hill. So getting to know people is also a really cool part of this job. Making friendships and just cultivating that, and it's a really great experience. I could rave about it all day, but I know you want to ask me other things.
No, absolutely. Honestly, from a much smaller scale, even just being at a small channel like this, but getting into a niche, my channel sort of has a base mostly in the Algorand cryptocurrency community, but I do try to be blockchain agnostic and cover all sorts of crypto news outside of that space as well. But just being immersed in that space, of course, it's a much smaller scale than what you just referenced, but it's the beauty of crypto and it being such a national and global phenomenon that you get to meet so many interesting people. I've spoken to all sorts of fantastic coders and entrepreneurs and builders in the space, and then investors, even Anthony Scaramucci, people that are doing like climate projects that have talked at the United Nations. So it's really, really interesting the amount of people and the different types of people that are in this space. There's not just there's not a stereotypical demographic, I would say, even though the media might want to paint a stereotypical demographic of crypto people, but there really isn't. It's so broad and vast and very interesting. I appreciate that story.
Yeah, no, of course. And you rightly say it's not all crypto bros, which I think is what the media wants to portray. But you do have people from all walks of life and super smart people as well. I mean, crypto's no easy thing to understand. I mean, I took a blockchain course when I first started out this whole thing, after writing the Ripple thing. And then I was like, maybe I should get some knowledge on this stuff, because a lot of it is pretty technical and I would like to understand how the whole thing works. So yes, I also believe that kind of plays a part in sort of the mystique around it as well. And maybe why it hasn't taken off, quite so much as, say, something like, I don't know, the internet, right? Like the internet, the dot-com bubble, like the internet came along and it was boom, everybody was using it.
None of us know how that works either, though, but that's a story for another day.
That's very true. But yeah, I do feel like, I guess we'll see, right? It's going to be a big year for crypto in 2024. This is just the starting point for, I would say, mainstream adoption. So we'll see how far that goes and what we can expect. It'll be pretty interesting to see this next year, especially.
Absolutely. And, let's move on a little bit to some of that mass adoption talk currently. So Fox Business, your network, just reported today. I'm going to read a little bit from this story and then we'll get your take on it, just in case my audience isn't aware of this story. But Fox Business reports that the SEC staffers held separate telephone conference calls with spot Bitcoin ETF hopefuls on Thursday afternoon. That's yesterday at the time of recording. And the call involved some minutia on the application process and it stated the agency staffers said the SEC will only consider applications that structure an ETF that allows issuers to only buy the product using cash instead of so-called in-kind purchases using Bitcoin. Similarly, redemptions of the ETF must also be provided only in cash. Any mention of in-kind purchases or redemptions must be stricken from the application, SEC staffers said. It goes on to state that Fox Business confirmed that calls were held with Blackrock, Valkyrie, Grayscale, ARK21 shares, and Bitwise. Also called by the SEC were the exchanges where the respective issuers plan to issue their ETFs, the NASDAQ and CBOE stock markets. Additionally, Fox Business has learned that the SEC asked issuers to submit amended filings by December 29th. Now, this has got the crypto market very excited. There's a lot of hopefuls, including friend of the show Anthony Scaramucci, who are rumoring, theorizing that the SEC may approve some of these applications over the Christmas break while people are distracted, where the news won't be a big hit. So that way, because a lot of people believe the SEC approvals are inevitable anyway, and if the SEC's goal is to minimize the impact on crypto, what better way to do it over a break where no one's paying attention? There might not be such a price skyrocket. What are your thoughts on this development, and do you think that we could see an early Bitcoin ETF approval?
So I really liked that take, actually. I saw that last night when Anthony put it out. I thought that's definitely something the SEC would do. I thought he had a good read on what they, what they're kind of their MO, right? They don't want it to be this earth-shattering, groundbreaking thing that the crypto markets and the crypto community believes it to be. They kind of want to downplay it. So I reached out to my sources, and I put this in the article, the one that you just referenced, that the applications now they're asking for them to be resubmitted, or they have to go back and edit them based on those phone calls that they had yesterday with the SEC and with the markets, the partnering markets. So I was told by one credible source that the applications are now not due until, well, the deadline specifically is next Friday. So that would be the 29th. So if that is true, I don't think that there could be any approval or any movement on this thing next week. That's just what I'm hearing. I think the likely target will be the week after that, and the days following that following week, because we've got January 10th is, I believe, that following Wednesday. So we've got the entire next week of the new year, that first week, and then those first couple of days of the week after. So I think that's a more likely timeline. The SEC was busy yesterday making calls to these issuers and basically saying, in no uncertain terms, you are going to do cash or nothing, because that's how they want it to be. They are really, at the end of the day, the ones controlling this whole process. So if these ETF issuers want to be in that first bucket of companies to launch, then they're going to have to accept that it's going to be cash only. In kind might come down the road later, but for now, take those in kind references out, because we're not going to cater to them at this present moment. So whether or not all parties were called, all the issuers who have put in an application for a spot ETF, I can't confirm that. The ones that were written there, I can actually confirm that they did have calls with them. Bitwise was actually the first one to say they were going to do a cash creation, cash redemption model. So I'm not sure they had to do too many changes to their application, but I think there were other details in there. So I think my colleague put it pretty well in the article, the minutia, or all the extra trimmings that were on the call, that were mentioned on the call. So I'm not sure exactly how much work each issuer has to do on their application. I just know that the deadline is next Friday. So will we see an approval next week? I don't think so. Although I do, I see Anthony's point. I think that would be a great way for the SEC to kind of mute the reaction and sort of downplay this whole thing.
Now, there's some naysayers that think that maybe all this hype is for nothing, and there's a chance that the SEC continues to deny these ETFs and kick the can down the road. What are your thoughts on the probability that at least by maybe early January or sometime early next year that we'll have at least a few approvals?
I'm pretty confident that by January 10th, or at least in January, we all say January 10th because that is the deadline for the SEC to either approve or deny ARK21 shares, which was the, for the first issuers, they that's when their deadline expires. The SEC technically has to answer them. And we know from past interactions with the SEC that these issuers have had that if they do something with one, then they traditionally do it with all of them. So it would make sense. And I've spoken to a lot of these, like the CEOs of these issuers, the Michael Sonnenshines of the world, who's Grayscale CEO, who says, we would like it to be a fair and balanced market, right? I don't think the SEC can really be a good faith actor if they, had just one go first or
Right.
two, because then all that, all the market share is going to go to them. And then what happens with the rest of them?
Right.
So I do think that the probability of a bunch of them going all at once or getting approved all at once is pretty high. And in terms of the deadline, I mean, I do think that they can either approve or deny. At this point, it's just there's been so much work. And I know from talking to people in these companies that behind the scenes, these meetings, these phone calls, John Deaton put it very succinctly in the podcast I just had with him. He said, if this does get denied, then it's going to be the biggest regulatory rug pull ever, because they've basically just gotten everybody's hopes up, had all these meetings and phone calls, made them do a whole bunch of changes to these applications, and then said no. And then you've also got the other side, which is Grayscale, the Grayscale court win, right? The judges, 3-panel judges said, there's not enough here for you to deny this. You need to take another look at the proposal. And that gave the momentum to give way for the rest of the companies, the issuers, to say, okay, we can actually do this too. So you look at that ruling, I think the SEC would have a hard time saying no when all of this work and all of this progress has been made. So at the end of the day, obviously the discretion lies with the SEC, but I think it would be surprising, very surprising if they disapprove. But you saw Gary Gensler, he's not changing his stance on crypto. I mean, his agency might be about to approve a spot Bitcoin ETF, but he's still of the thought that crypto is just terrible, and everybody in it is what does he call them, hucksters and fraudsters. So he's still not on board with this. However,
Right.
He might be forced to accept that this is something that the market wants now, and something that investors and their best interest lies with the investor, right? So they've got to do what makes their investors happy. But I guess we will see.
Yeah, talk about a character arc in Gary Gensler, going from somebody teaching blockchain courses to basically crypto enemy number one. So it's certainly
Right.
quite the character arc he's taken over the last 5+ years. Not even, I think, maybe something like that. As you mentioned, it's not only Gary Gensler who is a very big opponent of crypto, but as of late, the news came out that Elizabeth Warren has introduced part of a bill or a whole bill called the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2022, where she basically, if passed, in my opinion, could undermine the entire crypto ecosystem, the entire industry by, let's just go through it one by one. The Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act would extend the Bank Secrecy Act, which includes know your customer requirements, to digital asset wallet providers, miners, validators, and other network participants that may act to validate, secure, or facilitate digital asset transactions by directing FinCEN to designate these actors as money service businesses. I mean, we can leave it right there for now and go through the rest of them, but just that alone, in my opinion, is such an overreach of government. I understand the attempt to close some loopholes and maybe stop some of the money laundering that is going on, because there's no doubt some money laundering that's happening. I'm in no doubt that there is also some terrorist financing that happens through some of these cryptocurrencies and mixers alike. But to have digital asset wallet providers, miners, and validators have to KYC, I just think that's such an impossible ask that would essentially drive the entire crypto industry overseas. But what are your thoughts on that before we go through the rest of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a great comparison today from an article, and I forget where, but it was basically equating what you just said, everything that will require, the validators, everybody involved in the process to have to KYC, is basically the equivalent of car manufacturers being responsible for what happens on the road, right?
Right.
So like I make a Toyota, and then I'm all of a sudden responsible for the accidents it gets into or whatever. So I thought that was a good way of sort of framing it, because it also reminds me a little bit of the SEC climate disclosure rule with Scope 3, which would basically require the supply chain people involved in, these big companies, their supply chain, and people involved in that would have to report their impact on the environment, which is very costly. So, and first, I mean, you can go back to this as well in the bill. That's that's an extra step, but it's also probably likely going to be costly as well. So, talk about a hindrance. Talk about, yes, most likely, essentially killing crypto is the term that I've heard from a lot of people in the crypto world.
Right.
Patrick Hillman was on Fox Business today. He was the former chief strategy officer at Binance, and he used those words. He's like, it's effectively going to kill crypto, and as if crypto wasn't already pretty much. A lot of people have moved overseas. A lot of people have
Yep.
said, I've had it with the U.S. regulatory system because we do the best we can, but even when we do the best we can, we still get sued.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I do think that this is, like you said, another egregious attempt at government overreach. And, not surprising it's coming from Elizabeth Warren, because she has been historically anti-crypto. In fact, she basically advertised the fact that she was raising an anti-crypto army, right? She's now got 20% of the Senate on board to this anti-money laundering bill based on, which turned out to be incorrect information about terrorist financing and Hamas and how they use crypto. But I just think the whole thing is just it's a bit of a charade, because
Right.
I think she's ignoring the facts and the utility, right, for what crypto is used for. She's just basically going with the narrative without really thinking twice about it, saying crypto is they're all money launderers, they're all crooks, they're all so. If you're going to stand by that narrative, but you fine, but you've got to, you can't lobby a bill that's based on incorrect facts. And also we found out, I believe it was the Blockchain Association came out with a report that said that she and Roger Marshall, who were the co-signers on that bill, went to the American Bankers Association to help write it. So this is coming from bankers too, and what industry is the most threatened by cryptocurrency and financial liberty? That would be the banks. So you've got a party that has a conflict of interest helping senators write a bill that could potentially affect an entire industry, an entire group of people, an entire group of entrepreneurs. So it's pretty shocking.
Right. And it's coming from a senator that has gotten most of her public notoriety from going against banks and, having those public spats with Jamie Dimon and other bankers in Senate hearings. So it is a very interesting twist. But I'm actually kind of curious, because right now, the senators announced that Senators Raphael Warnock, the Democratic senator from Georgia, LaFonza Butler from California, Chris Holland from, I believe that's Maine or Maryland, all members of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, and Senators John Hickenlooper and Ben Ray Lujan joined the bill as co-sponsors, and they joined existing co-sponsors Senator Roger Marshall, along with Senators Joe Manchin, Lindsey Graham, Gary Peters, Chair of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, Dick Durbin, Chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Tina Smith, Angus King, Jean Shaheen, Bob Casey, Richard Blumenthal, Michael Bennett, Catherine Cortez Matzo, Sheldon. So the list goes on. There's two more names there, Sheldon Whitehouse and John Fetterman. So I guess the question here is, do you think this bill will pick up any steam? We mentioned that there seems to be I don't want to say a coordinated attack, but it does seem like a coordinated attack against crypto from government, from different angles. However, Elizabeth Warren doesn't necessarily have the greatest track record. In fact, I went back and looked at it, and since 2019, I believe she's sponsored or brought forth about 240 bills, and only one of them has become law. So that's a win rate essentially of less than half of 1%. Of course, there are still some that could become law, that are still in committee, that still eventually could become law down the road. But as of right now, she doesn't have a great batting average if we want to use baseball speak. So is this something that we should be concerned about? Is this something that's more just going to grab crypto headlines and then go away a couple of weeks from now? What do you think on this story?
I don't think it's necessarily going to go away. John Deaton, I keep bringing him up because I did just do a podcast with him a few minutes before I joined yours. we talked about this topic as well, and he said, it's not like the entire world is on crypto Twitter, right? You and I spend a good amount of time on crypto Twitter, where the CEOs of crypto companies, coders, people, everybody involved in every level of digital assets, right, comes to get their news, comes to be part of a community. But the wider world is not on crypto Twitter. In fact, the wider world is not on Twitter or X, whatever you call it, at all. And it's all about the narrative. So if Elizabeth Warren is successful in pushing this narrative that crypto is bad, crypto finance is terrorist, and especially that's a very tender subject to bring up, especially with everything that's happened in Israel and Palestine in the last 2 months. So, if you're going to start blaming the ills of the world on a certain group of people or a certain technology, which crypto is, then, and you get support for it from lawmakers, I think that's pretty dangerous. And I do think that crypto, as we talked about in the beginning, the adoption rate, especially in the US, is not as great as I think, some people would like it to be, as the industry would like it to be. There's still quite a way to go. A lot of that has to do with lack of regulations. So hopefully we'll get some movement on that. But it's dangerous if you're going to blame, one technology or a group of people for all the ills of the world. But it's all about perception. It's all about perception. And if she can convince 20% of the Senate to get on board with this, then you might be able to convince a certain a certain percentage of the American people as well.
Yeah, that's true. And my biggest issue, I suppose, with it is not that, like I said, there's not that I doubt that there are people that are money laundering with crypto. It's not that I doubt that there are some terrorist financing with crypto. It's just that there isn't the entire story being told, and it's just a one-sided, as if that is all that's happening with crypto. I'd love to see the bigger picture and have actual analytics showcase, okay, well, how much of that financing is done with US dollars relative to crypto? That comparison is never made. It's never made, how much of the transaction activity is related to money laundering, where how much isn't, because they don't want to give that whole picture, because I bet it's essentially 99% to 1. Obviously, don't quote me, I don't have these analytics, but I'd be willing to bet that that's pretty close to correct. So that's really my biggest issue with this, is it's not that I doubt that those things might be true, it's just I feel that it's only a partial truth to fit a certain narrative, and it does kind of concern me. Especially when it's coming from, like you said, such a high level. We just read a bunch of the co-sponsors on the bill. Of course, aside from maybe 2 members of the Republican Party, it did seem like it had a very Democrat slant to it. There wasn't too much bipartisan support on this yet, but it could grow. But I'm curious, because this is actually a pretty good segue to something that you recently reported on your Twitter, where Grayscale partnered with the Harris poll to get a read on crypto in the 2024 elections. And some key findings were that 46% of likely voters say that they are weighting additional policies and or regulation before investing in crypto. 40% expect their future investment portfolio to include some crypto. 48% say that additional policies and or regulation around crypto would make them more likely to invest. And Gen Z and millennials are also more likely to say that they are both more likely to vote for a candidate that is informed about crypto at about 59%, and note that they are considering a candidate's position on crypto when casting their vote in the 2024 US presidential election, about 50% for Gen Z and 48% for millennials. So I suppose my question is, if a bill like this can really get kicked down the road until the 2024 election, do you think the makeup of the Congress after 2024 will reflect a more pro-crypto bias as opposed to anti-crypto bias, or maybe at least a little bit more so than it does now? I don't think it'll have too much of a play, even regardless of this poll, with the presidential election, because I do think the Democratic Party is trying really hard to make sure it's Biden. I don't think Biden's going to change his stances on much. And it does look like, at least at the current polls, as long as Trump can stay on the ballot, it will just be a rematch of Trump and Biden again. So I'm not sure crypto policies will have too much sway there, but it could change the makeup of the Congress. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I agree with you on all of those points, actually. I think, definitely probably not too much of an influence in the presidential election, but I think there's a big wave of people, especially in the crypto community, you see the lobbying going on by people like the Blockchain Association. Coinbase they've done a thing where they basically help people reach out to their lawmakers, right? And they help them write letters. They help them say, we want this technology. We believe it's, it's beneficial and we want it to stay. There's definitely a more momentous effort, I would say, towards voting for people who actually listen to their constituents and say, hey, like, this is what I want, as opposed to just, running on empty promises, which I think a lot of these candidates actually end up doing.
Yeah.
I don't think that whether it's next year, whether it's, the midterms, I'm not sure that crypto will still have that much of an impact in terms of like who people vote for as candidates. I still think there are other issues that will probably come ahead of that. However, these incumbents, they're all slightly older. So, as people, I hate to say it, but as people, die, people leave their positions, because, most of these politicians do hold these senators. They hold their power for a long, long time. We saw Dianne Feinstein just she basically died and she was still in office and she was in her 90s. You got Chuck Grassley, who's up in his 80s. You got these people who are here for a long, long time. But as time goes on, obviously we will see a younger crowd come in. And I think from that poll, from the Harris poll and Grayscale's findings, younger people are more tech savvy. Obviously, they're more likely to know what crypto is. A lot of them see crypto as part of their investing future. I think that was one of the stats in there as well. So, whether it's in 2024 or it's in 2036, I think we'll get there, but it's going to take time, and we're still in very early stages right now.
2036. That sounds. I don't even think crypto can think that far ahead. I mean, 1 month in crypto is basically like a year, so it's going to feel like an eternity by the time we get there.
Exactly.
You mentioned Coinbase, and I actually wanted to bring this up when we were talking about Elizabeth Warren, because Elizabeth Warren took some jabs at Coinbase regarding their, quote, revolving door, taking jabs at some of the people that they've hired that have worked for the government that they're now using to help lobby, for their positions. And I want to get your take on this, because I know that you reported actually some revolving door interests of Elizabeth Warren's. So it's kind of the pot calling the kettle black in that situation. But I also want to just make the point, and you can agree with this or not agree with this if you want to, but I want to just make the point and let it be known that the revolving door is a government problem. It's not a private industry problem. It's if Warren has an issue with that revolving door and Coinbase having staffers and employees that worked at high levels of government, then she can write a law forbidding government employees from working in these private industries after they leave office. Like that is incumbent on them, and that's a reflection of the lack of their job and them fulfilling their duties than it is a reflection on the private industries. I mean, a private industry is going to use anything they can to gain leverage. I mean, it'd be economically advantageous for any business to do what Coinbase is doing, and they're not alone. Every business is lobbying the government for something. But it's really incumbent upon the government to make sure that these things don't happen if they don't want them to happen. But I'm curious, can you elaborate on some of these revolving door issues, so to speak, that Elizabeth Warren has, and some of the hypocrisy in her stance there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in saying the revolving door is not a private sector problem. It is a government problem, and it's also like a tale as old as time, because this has been happening since government existed and the private sector existed, right? It's been happening for a long time. Elizabeth Warren has been particularly vocal, even before the crypto aspect of it. She's been particularly vocal about getting rid of that revolving door. She's talked about it with the bank. She's talked about it with other big industry.
Right.
But
and I
like
support
said,
it,
yes.
but just
Yeah,
make that happen,
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for that. But then if you're going to be so honed down on one sector, right? Like now she is doing that with crypto's revolving door that she talks about. There's been revolving doors in her office as a senator, right? She's had a bunch of staffers go on to work in private companies. She was her brainchild. My boss likes to call it a brainchild. I'm not entirely sure what a brainchild is, but her brainchild is the CFPB, right? Like that was her baby, right? She, after the financial crisis in 2008, she came up with the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to protect consumers from the evils of the big banks, right? And her chief of staff at the CFPB happened to be Wally Ademo, who went on to work for Blackrock. And he is now the deputy U.S. Treasury Secretary. So that's the perfect example of, working for government, then going to private, and then using that leverage to go even higher in government, something like a deputy U.S. Treasury. And then a similar, we've reported at Fox Business before, my boss Charlie and I, that Gary Gensler himself has ambitions of becoming Treasury Secretary, right? And he was a Goldman guy. He was in private industry, and then he used that to get his position as the CFTC chair. And then from the CFTC chair, he went into teaching, and then he went to the SEC, and now he wants to be Treasury Secretary. So it's definitely a problem. But for Elizabeth Warren to call it out as a crypto problem is very hypocritical, because it wasn't just Wally Ademo. There were a couple of instances in that report which I referenced where it's basically her staffers at the CFPB went on to work at or advise for the big banks, and the CFPB was created to tone down the influence of those banks. So if you're going to go, it's like basically saying an SEC commissioner who writes a law about, I don't know, climate disclosure, right? Then goes on to work for a climate, company, which actually did happen. One of the former SEC commissioners, Allison Lee, she helped come up with the whole climate disclosure proposal. She went on, now she works in the private sector at one of those companies that deals with climate change disclosures, and so she stands to benefit from if the SEC passes this bill. It's been not this bill. I'm sorry, it passes this ruling that they've been talking about for more than a year now. Then they stand to benefit. So is that fair? Like some would say, all's fair in love and business, but you can't be calling out an industry for something that's been happening for forever, and something that you've actually had a personal hand in.
Yeah, in the conflicts of interest, it's something that it's interesting because this whole conversation basically just illuminates that, they have to get their own house in order before they can start looking outside to be like, hey, you got to clean up your industry over here. I mean, it's such a mess. I mean, we can extend this conversation to politicians that are stock trading on stocks and industries that they're writing bills on. They're basically creating the legislation that's going to impact these industries, whether positively or negatively, and then them or their husbands, allegedly, who are going to, cast votes or cast, option trades or buy stocks in certain directions based on these policies. So it does kind of seem, very interesting when the government tries to, as you said, reach out based on bills or acts that are written by an industry's competitors to say you have to get your house in order while their house is completely a mess. So that of course is very interesting. But I don't have you for too much longer. I want to move the conversation a little bit to exchanges. There's some big news in the industry this year in 2023, most notably between FTX as well as Binance now. So of course we know FTX at the end of last year went under. Sam Bankman-Fried has been officially convicted and will spend a good amount of time in jail. I don't believe he'll spend all the time in jail that he has been sentenced to. And Binance, CZ, had to step down and has faced, I think, like a $4 billion fine or something to that magnitude. It's relatively large. What are your thoughts on the future of crypto exchanges? Should Coinbase be worried? Are there going to be any centralized exchanges left? Is this going to be a crypto attack that eventually knocks down all of these exchanges, and then regulatory clarity comes and Fidelity and Blackrock and all the other, traditional financial sectors create their own crypto exchanges and basically shutters out all of the ones that have existed before it? What are your thoughts there?
I think we're definitely seeing the consolidation of centralized crypto exchanges. I don't think they'll go away completely. I do think Coinbase is a public company, right? It has a place in the financial markets now. It's not like a Binance or an FTX that was, first of all, not publicly traded, and Binance wasn't even technically a U.S. company. So I think that alone kind of solidifies their place here. Now, will they be controlling however much percentage-wise of the market share that they currently have in, say, 10 years from now? Probably not. I do think that there's a lot to be said for, decentralized exchanges too, because really with a decentralized exchange, that is sort of the bread and butter of what crypto was created for, right? No middleman, no people making decisions, right? Gary Gensler always talks about the middleman, and if there is one, then that means you're not decentralized. So I do think that you'll see probably a rise in more decentralized exchanges. But then what comes with that, the complication that comes with that, is the regulation surrounding that, because Congress can barely figure out how to regulate a centralized exchange, right? Can barely figure out anything that we already have on the table, let alone DeFi. So I I wouldn't be surprised at the point that you brought up, with the Blackrocks and the Fidelities of the world coming in and making their own exchanges. That wouldn't shock me. But, I think what we'll likely see is it's just more of a consolidation of the centralized exchanges, maybe a little bit more of a rise in the DEXs. But it will be interesting to see, because again, that regulatory hurdle, like it's it's complicated. It's complicated stuff. You think lawmakers, this is not their forte, right? They need people to explain this stuff to them and explain how it works. So right. It's going to take time. Like I said before, this is going to take a lot of time for sure.
And it gets even more complicated with bills like Elizabeth Warren's that she's introduced, because, if the validators of these decentralized exchanges or the transactions that happen on these exchanges have to register as money service businesses, I feel like that could very much so hinder the decentralized ecosystem, the DeFi ecosystem, and really make it so it's only essentially legally able to transact on these traditional networks. It does kind of seem like that is the ultimate push, but that might just be my eternal skepticism at play, and making me too much of a pessimist in that area. But of course, time will tell in that aspect. But one last question: do you think there's a lot of excitement with the Bitcoin ETF approval? We didn't even talk about the likelihood of an Ethereum ETF approval that will likely follow. Who knows when? Maybe 6 to 12 months down the line after a Bitcoin ETF approval. Wouldn't surprise me. But what are your thoughts? Do you think it's possible that crypto could eventually see the day where they have sort of a similar ETF as like SPY, the SP 500, the top 500 cryptocurrencies, or like QQQ or something like that, but for crypto, where you have the top 100 cryptocurrencies in an ETF? Or do you think we'll continue to get these like single asset ETFs like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and maybe, the number 3 will get an ETF a couple years later? What are your thoughts there?
I think we'll start out with the basics. I think, baby steps, right? So we're seeing the Bitcoin ETF. We have Ethereum futures ETFs, which I was reminded about today. Completely forgot that they actually launched that back in the end of October, early November. So, from there, like you said, a couple months down the line, maybe even a year, we might see an Ethereum spot ETF. I think once they've got the mechanics in order, I think the real problem was that they've never done an ETF with crypto before, right? And it is like you can argue that crypto is not a security, that it's a commodity, but it's different to gold. It's different to the precious metals in the way that it's just crypto is different. Crypto is a technology. So coming up with new ways to integrate that into the traditional markets it's just basically it's figuring out how to do it. And I think that was the big hurdle with the Bitcoin spot ETF. So now when that gets approved, hopefully that gets approved in the next couple of weeks, then we should see the door open for more like an Ethereum spot ETF. And then I don't see why not, that we might not have, an ETF down the line where we have like a basket of, the top 100 cryptos. I still think crypto is it's such a nascent industry in the US still. I think the top, what is it, 4 cryptocurrencies? We've got Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then following that, I think XRP is down at like 6 now. It used to be number 3.
Yeah, it depends if you count stable coins or not.
Right. So there's what I'm trying to say is there's such a discrepancy between Bitcoin and Ethereum, the big two, that the price is, right? And then you've got, you go down a little bit further, and then you've got like Dogecoin, which is trading at like pennies on the dollar, right? And that's same with XRP. So these there's such a big gap in these prices, where it's like, would it even be sort of like worth putting that into an ETF until, maybe the prices appreciate as more adoption happens, as there's more regulatory clarity down the line. So I think, again, I'm going to say this again, it's going to take time, but I don't see why not, down the line, if there's something like the SPY or, the NASDAQ 100 for cryptocurrencies, I see it happening.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting, and I don't see why not. There's already small cap sector ETFs out there that invest in small market cap companies, some companies that have comparable and maybe even smaller market caps in some of these smaller cryptocurrencies as well. So it's certainly a hope of mine. But Ellie, I appreciate your time today. Before we go, where can people reach out to learn more about your reporting and whatever you're working on next?
So I do most of my work on Twitter. So you can follow me at Eleanor Terrett, my handle, and then my Fox Business page is also posted in my bio. So any news stories, you can click on that link and they'll bring you right to my Fox Business page.
Fantastic. I'll leave links to those down in the description below. And are there any final words or anything else that you want to talk about before we leave today that you want to bring attention to my audience?
Just that I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year or Happy Holidays, whatever you guys celebrate. If you're in crypto and if you're watching this, then I'm sure you are. It's been a monumental year, to say the least. And I think we can all be excited for what's going to come in 2024. There'll definitely be some big developments, lots of news. So stay tuned to wonderful channels like this because, people like you, JT, really break it down in great ways. So yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'd like to come back.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on a small channel. We're growing, but we're going to get there. And Merry Christmas to you as well. Everyone out there, check out Ellie's Twitter page as well as her Fox page. The links will be in the descriptions. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And hopefully we'll catch you in the next episode.
Ladies and gentlemen.